You can't see it, smell it, or taste it, but it's all around. We call it acid rain. We know acids, plus other forms of air pollution, are killing our lakes and damaging buildings. The latest news is the most serious of all. Air pollution is threatening our forests, from backyard trees to wilderness mountaintops. Something terrible is happening to the forests of eastern North America. Over the past 3 or 4 years, nearly all species of deciduous trees, especially sugar maple, have begun to die. So far, the most dramatically affected area is the southern part of Quebec, just north of New York, Vermont, and Maine. Any large loss of trees is serious. Greece, North Africa, and Haiti lost their tree cover within recorded history, and with it their water and most of their arable land. The Eastern American forest, besides being the basis for much of the Eastern economy, conserves the land and water and supports our wildlife. Now, whole farms are losing their trees, and the wood is so rotten, it's often unfit even for burning.
Over the last 10 years, I've lost almost half my trees, even more. At the moment, my maple bush is at least 80% sick. 3 or 4 years from now, I won't be making syrup.
These representatives from Canadian and New England environment departments came to Quebec farms to see dying maples already showing late fall colors the first week of September, 1986.
This has been very dramatic. We've heard a lot of reports, and you read about it in the newspaper, and I think it's very valuable for us to come actually see it in the field. The crowns are incredibly thin. I've never seen a forest stand like this. And to see, as I've heard, the dieback that's taken place very quickly in the last couple of years.
We share biological systems. There just happens to be a man-made line in between them. Quebec's survey maps end at that 50-foot wide strip that's at the border between Maine and Canada, Maine and Quebec. And it's fairly obvious that the problem exists in the state of Maine. It's just something that people haven't looked at.
There aren't many healthy maples left in Quebec. This one in McGill University's Arboretum still looks pretty much like it should, with a dense crown, large dark green leaves, and no easily spotted dead branches or serious thinning, unlike the tree to the left, which is showing signs of decline. These trees, whether in a woods or your backyard, exhibit an easily recognized range of symptoms. They have undersized, discolored leaves towards the top. Later, some fall to the ground, even in full summer, and show these symptoms of nutritional deficiencies in magnesium and potassium. Leaves start to color in August or early September, the early autumn syndrome. The classic symptom is dying back from the crown. The tree becomes so sick it loses bark from dead limbs while still alive. Usually, within 5 years from the first symptoms, the tree will be dead. This blight is spreading all over New England as well, as in this sugar bush. David Marvin is a major syrup producer in Vermont.
The stands look green, but if you look carefully up through the lower crown, the tops of trees in many, many areas are sick and dying. To the eye that's not looking, it doesn't look like a problem. But that's precisely the problem. And after all, we are only 35 miles from the Canadian border, where the problem is very, very evident.
The first sign that anything was wrong was growth slowdowns in Quebec maples in the 70s. Around 1980, when the trees started to die in alarming numbers, researchers investigated every possible cause: disease, frost, drought, insects, poor management, and eliminated all of them. They just didn't correlate with the incidence of dieback, which began on west-facing elevations, but soon spread to all parts of the province. The government of Quebec responded by initiating the most elaborate deciduous forest monitoring system in the world. It maps all the maple stands in the province, then surveys them by air to chart health or decline. Green means healthy stands, yellow declining ones, and red dead or dying trees. Every year the red and yellow spread further across the map, and the green disappears. It's called forest dieback, and it's accelerated far beyond initial predictions. But even if it holds steady at its present rate, the Quebec government has publicly announced that there could be an end to their maple syrup industry, the largest in the world, in less than a decade. Worse, since only a few species are presently unaffected, they predict all the large trees and nearly all the province's deciduous forest will be dead within 20 years. At first, scientists took leaf samples to see if anything was attacking the trees directly. They found that leaves from dying trees were low in nutrients like calcium, magnesium, and potassium, and also contained abnormally high amounts of poisons like aluminum. Dieback symptoms are identical with what you'd get if you severely damaged a tree's roots. These two facts made researchers look for nutritional imbalances in the soil. Scientists have known for a long time that if you deposit enough sulfuric or nitric acid on soil, these acids will leach minerals like calcium and potassium down to lower levels. Since a tree's feeding roots are concentrated around the surface of the soil, that means that food simply becomes unavailable. Lise Robitaille is a forester working on the Quebec government study of maple decline at their Duchesnay site near Quebec City.
Normally, the color of a leaf is dark green. With decline, we can observe as early as now, the beginning of June, yellowing of the foliage. This yellowing indicates that the tree is suffering, that it's stressed, that it's lacking nutrients necessary to its growth. So these young trees, contrary to what many people think, are going to die too. Many people say to me, we're losing the big trees, but a young forest is growing to replace them. That's false, because we already see symptoms of nutritional deficiencies in these young trees. And there are also soil analyses that have been made even here at Duchesnay, and we found the soils themselves have lost between 50 and 75% of their nutrients over the last 10 years. We think the cause is pollution. People have to realize what's happening. It's an ecological catastrophe.
We have created this disaster ourselves. The burning of fossil fuels in our industries and cars creates nitrous oxides, ozone, and a stew of heavy metals and poisons. Sulfuric acid, a byproduct of coal burning, has long been a villain and seems to play a significant part in what we are learning about forest decline in the East. Most modern industry and all our vehicles pollute, but high quantities of sulfur dioxide come primarily from the American Midwest, around the Ohio Valley. High sulfur coal is mined and shipped by river to fuel the industries that support the area. In the 60s, tall stacks were built all over North America to improve local air quality. They've turned the dumping of waste in industrial areas into the death of other people's livelihoods downwind. Atmospheric scientists have recently learned to trace the path of air pollutants on prevailing weather systems, so we now know where the problem is coming from. However, many of the most dangerous compounds are made by chemical reactions up in the atmosphere. We start off with sulfur and get sulfuric acid from reactions with sunlight and moisture. Ozone is created from nitrous oxides and light. Beneficial in the upper atmosphere where it shields us from the sun, ozone is a proven pollutant down here with detrimental effects on plant and human health. This computer model of a storm predicts how a moving weather system starting around the Mississippi River picks up sulfur dioxide from industrial sources and then deposits it, first on or near the pollution sources themselves, which always bear the brunt, but later on further east, where the wind blows it hundreds of kilometers to land on wilderness and farm areas. The parts of eastern North America showing the most obvious forest problems also contain thousands of lakes which have been damaged by air pollution over the last 2 decades. Air pollution acidifies lakes. That fact is no longer disputed. Many of our lakes and streams have already died, which means that their waters have gradually become poisonous to most forms of life. Thousands more, from Florida to northern Ontario, are at risk. This life doesn't magically disappear one morning. Animals like fish and frogs suffer agonizing deaths from suffocation and starvation. These fish's gills are clogged with mucus. They're fighting for breath, just like a person suffering from asthma. Acidity is measured on a pH scale. The lower the number, the higher the acidity. Small pond life starts to disappear at a pH of 6. By 4.0, nearly everything is dead. It's early September, and Luc Lacasse is having his sugar bush tested for acidity.
Here, you see? I'm going to get a bit of humus, the part that's well broken down here.
It's the first step in determining whether a natural system has been radically altered. Soil, like water, can become contaminated with the acids dropped year after year in dust and precipitation. Soil in a bush like this would normally have a pH around 5.5. In early September, a few years ago, these trees would still have been green. Now they're showing the familiar symptoms of decline. The stand once provided a large percentage of the farm's cash income. Now its soil has suddenly become incapable of supporting life.
See how you can tell? See the color, the reaction?
Yes.
There, read it on my scale. Read it yourself. What does it say?
4. Extremely acid.
4.0. Imagine the kind of maple bush we have here, 4.0.
It's too bad that the scientists can't help us better than that. Because we're actually living with this problem and we can't do anything. We just submit to it. That's about all we can do now. It's too bad.
Most atmospheric research is done at high elevations. This is the Mount Sutton site at the Quebec-Vermont border. Tom Bridges of Canada's Atmospheric Environment Service.
This problem has been going on for many years, and there's evidence now when we backtrack to show that, for example, the lakes were acidifying in the 1950s. Salmon were disappearing from the East Coast rivers in the 1950s. Growth of trees was declining in the 1960s. We're now seeing the cumulative effect of about 50 or 60 years of an environmental pollution onslaught.
The extent of forest dieback is growing almost monthly. Once thought to be a local problem for parts of southern Quebec and New England, symptoms are now appearing in Ontario and the Maritimes and are spreading into more species and growing sites once thought immune. Dieback is well established above the cloud line in North Carolina, where the forests, battered by extremely acidic fogs, have come to resemble a war zone. The problems began with slowdowns in growth and have quickly escalated at their worst to this kind of devastation. Scientists can measure growth by taking core samples from living trees. All over North America, they've noted dramatic slowdowns in tree growth after World War II, when pollution from cars and industry took a quantum leap, and in the 1960s, when the tall stacks were installed. The same growth slowdowns that hit New England a decade ago are now being reported almost everywhere east of the Mississippi, in the valuable pine stands of Georgia and the rich woodlands of Kentucky and the Midwest. All over North America, research on forest decline is a growth industry. Scientists shelter seedlings from natural rain and blow ozone and other pollutants at them. Plants are measured and metered for growth and ability to produce food after being exposed to pollutants. On top of our mountains and deep in our forests, cloud catchers comb fogs to measure acidity. Both simple and complex installations are collecting dust, snow, and rain and measuring them for pollutants. Researchers are trying to find out just how much contamination is falling on our trees, our water, and our soil, and what effect it has, even though we don't have enough long-term data on their natural state in the first place. Some tendencies are showing up. Not just watersheds, but soils in areas where forests are declining are becoming more acidic. They're losing their nutrients and their ability to support life. Dr. Richard Klein, a microbiologist at the University of Vermont, is one of the researchers studying this phenomenon. Soil is made up of dead plant and animal material which falls to the forest floor to be chewed up by countless numbers of invertebrates and microorganisms that flourish there. They turn the forest debris into nutrients that the next generation of plants can feed on.
There's been a large number of studies of these. Acids as well as metals are capable of injuring very severely all of the bacteria that are involved in the transformation of various substances. For example, the litter, that is the leaves, the small twigs, material like this simply isn't getting broken down. This means that it is accumulating, and it means then that the nutrients that are in this are not being recycled to be taken up again by plants.
Acids also dissolve solid poisons, so they suddenly enter the plant systems instead of the nutrients they need.
We know, for example, that heavy metals such as aluminum or the lead that was deposited by automobiles and cadmium and zinc from smelting plants accumulates in the soil, is solubilized by acidic precipitation, and thus becomes available to be taken up by plant roots.
There's been a hot debate over whether pollutants can actually kill trees in a laboratory situation. At the University of Vermont, trees were sprayed with artificial acid rain and then analyzed chemically to see if the various acids and metals had been absorbed.
We were able, as part of our experimental system, to actually kill young spruce trees with combinations of metal and acid in concentrations that are ecologically realistic.
Throughout the North American East, the forest's reaction to our assault is the same. Here on the Canadian Shield, poor, thin soils based with granite have almost no defenses to protect them from the tons of pollutants that are blown their way every year. Granite can't buffer acids, and trees, stressed by hard winters and thin soils, are especially ill-equipped to deal with the poisons added by humans. Up here, the population survives almost entirely on trees, on forest industries, fishing camps, and tourism. The value of these lakes and forests goes beyond mere economics. For those of us who are cooped up in concrete cities most of the year, This is an essential reconnection with nature. It's more than some trees and a beach. It's all the interrelated plants and animals that make up the natural environment, the one we were all born to. Its importance to our psychic as well as physical survival is beyond price. Resort owner Ross Boothby.
My grandfather began this business in 1907. We've been operating in the same family for now 3 generations. People come back year after year to enjoy the beauty of this area, enjoy nature, and certainly anything happening to our environment, our surrounding trees and so on, would be a disaster.
The disaster is here. Maple bushes in the Muskoka region of Ontario, for example, are showing symptoms only 2 or 3 years behind Quebec's. The area is also suffering from continuous and devastating insect attacks. This doesn't happen to healthy trees. Many studies have shown that trees under sulfur and nitrogen pollution stress are far more likely to be the victims of such chronic attacks. The situation in the region is so serious that flocks of investigators have invaded the woods to conduct their studies. Tom Hutchinson of the University of Toronto.
I think we're in danger of having an extremely serious decline in hardwoods in Ontario, quite extensively, starting on the Shield, but there's really no reason to suppose that it won't eventually get to other areas too. I mean, we're talking about, I would imagine, hundreds of square miles at the moment, in which there's decline going on.
Most of the pollution that is poisoning the soil and trees of the East comes from the American Midwest. Although some of the heavy ozone levels and 4 million tons of sulfur dioxide created yearly in the Ohio Valley is picked up by the winds, most of it falls back down on the trees and water of the Midwest. So we'd expect this area to have suffered forest damage, yet the trees surrounding the factories still seem fine, when you can glimpse them through the sulfate haze. Before the sudden growth of the electric power industry about 30 years ago, the Ohio River Valley, like New England, was an agricultural area of striking natural beauty and a long history. Natural conditions along the Ohio have produced the most lush deciduous forests on the continent. In contrast to conditions in the east, the rich soils here are based with limestone, which naturally buffers pollutants, and the region enjoys a mild climate. In fact, if anything happened to trees here, it would be a strong indication of serious ecological breakdown. Despite these natural protections, the fogs of the Midwestern summers are now bathing these trees in some of the continent's highest levels of acids and ozone. Until recently, research wasn't being done on the possible effects of the many man-made additions to this ideal forest environment. Dr. Ori Laux of Butler University maintains several research plots on trees in the Ohio Valley region.
This preserve, as it turns out, is relatively close to the major point sources of sulfur dioxide and nitrogen oxide emissions, as well as being downwind from the city of Cincinnati. So we've come here a number of times to look at the status of foliar symptoms, first of all, and as we looked at the area here, we've begun to be aware of an unusual level of branch dieback, and over the last year or two, an increasing amount of tree mortality. The most dramatic symptoms that we see here, an early yellowing of foliage, often by early July, and this leads to general chlorosis, almost the development of fall color by early August, followed by the beginning of leaf fall by middle or late August. Those symptoms are, we believe, traceable to ozone. But now we've had these elevated ozone levels probably 25 years in this region, and you have to start asking, well, what's the long-term effect? We think the answer is becoming apparent now, and it's an induced premature senescence of the whole tree, leading to a premature mortality.
Sassafras, pawpaw, buckeye, sweet gum, tulip trees. This rich variety of species that most of us only read about has evolved here, undisturbed by earthquake or ice advance for 60 million years. Many of these rarities, as well as common species like red and black oak, are now starting to sicken and die in some areas, like sugar maple in the east. This selective decline is one of the hardest things to spot, especially in a forest with dozens of other kinds of healthy trees.
So I think it's understandable that we miss seeing the early symptoms here, because there's a great deal of buffering capacity, of resilience in this system. But we have to ask the question now, have we reached the limit of that buffering capacity? And what will be the next set of symptoms that we'll be seeing as we begin to lose some of the most sensitive elements?
Natural systems don't function or decline in isolation. When human additions change something as basic as the chemical composition of earth and water, the animals and plants that had adapted to original conditions can no longer survive. For example, all the species of ducks that breed on the Atlantic flyway have been drastically declining since the 1950s. Part of their loss is now being blamed on lake acidification, which limits food supply at incubating and hatching periods, so that mothers are malnourished and ducklings starve. Declining forests are losing crown-feeding birds, like flycatchers and vireos, while those feeding on diseased trees, like the once rare pileated woodpecker, are temporarily booming. Important food sources like spring peepers and bullfrogs are steadily disappearing from eastern waters. Mink are dying from the increased mercury leached into their food supply by acids, and larger animals have become poisoned the same way. These declines are real. Exactly which pollutant, acids, ozone, heavy metals, causes each one is harder to pinpoint. We expect science to do this for us, but in fact, science works by isolating factors and focusing on a part of nature. Scientists can't easily analyze several factors in constantly changing natural systems, and it's close to impossible to pick out a pollutant from all the other things that may be affecting the forests. The closest analogy is environmentally caused diseases in humans. People have complicated and individual responses to man-made chemicals, and so do trees. And like humans, forest systems can't be experimented on in the lab. To get around this, medical researchers use a method called epidemiology that can show links between environment and disease. They simply correlate the incidence of the disease with suspected factors common to the victims, and then keep amassing this circumstantial evidence until it becomes overwhelming. The industries that stand to gain the most from resisting all forms of pollution control used to deny the environment was suffering any damage at all. Now that the sheer weight of evidence has made that position ludicrous, many industries are still looking for excuses to delay every phase of a cleanup. Darrell Menser is president of one of the American Midwest's larger utility companies, providing electricity by burning coal.
I don't feel that, at least from our company's perspective, it would take absolute proof that the acid rain is the cause of all the damage in the New England and Canadian area. I think more what we're looking for is proof that reduction of SO2 in the Midwest would perceptibly change the acid rain concentration in New England and southern Canada. The studies we've seen show that over a 10-year period in the 1973-85 timeframe, there was a total reduction in SO2 from the Midwest, 17% of which was from power plants, and there was no perceptible change in the acidity of rain in New England.
The sulfur dioxide emissions that affect this area, for example, probably have decreased in the order of 25% in the last decade or so. In fact, in some parts of the country, our watersheds are showing some recovery, and some of the surface waters are in better quality, better condition than they were 10 years ago. The problem with that is, though, the good news is, yes, if you reduce sulfur dioxide emissions, you solve the problem. The bad news is we haven't gone far enough, that these areas have simply moved from a deposition that was very high to one that's still too high. And so we have not solved the problem. We've only moved to some extent in the right direction. And the important thing there is that we have demonstrated in a real live experiment that by reducing sulfur dioxide emissions, we can reduce the acidification stress on these environments.
Robert Junke of the U.S. lobby group, the Environmental Defense Fund.
There's been a lot of talk over the last 5 or 6 years about how much sulfur we have to take out of the air to protect the environment. And almost all of the discussion has focused on the lake impact, the acidification. And what the scientists are telling us is if we reduce the inputs by 50%, we'll bring the acidity back to a level that's close enough to normal, that fish can live there again. Now we're beginning to see, with the new data on forests, is that the sulfate is tying up the nutrients in the soil. It's locking up what the tree needs, and the tree can't get it. And that's why the trees are dying. Well, this is not a fluid situation. The sulfates aren't being flushed out of that system. They're being trapped in the soil. There's only so much that the soil can absorb. So if we continue to put sulfate into that system, we're going to continue to poison it. If we cut back by only 50%, that simply means that we're going to poison it at half the rate. Instead of killing the forest in 10 years, it'll take us 20 years, but we're still going to kill the forests.
Although some people still question the links between air pollution and increasing damage to trees in North America, nature isn't waiting for us to figure it all out. In the Northeast, whole forests are collapsing with terrifying speed. Lise Robitaille, Quebec forestry expert.
Every year we measure the extent of the decline, and there's not one place where it has stayed the same or gotten better. Everywhere, every year, more trees are affected, and they're more severely affected, even in the best growing areas.
In Quebec and Ontario, governments are putting money into experimental fertilizing programs to save trees by adding lost nutrients. Arch Jones of McGill University.
Certainly we're concerned very much with this decline of sugar maple, and we're now at the stage where we're trying to make some corrections by fertilizing, using fertilizers that are high in calcium, potassium, and magnesium. These are the three elements that are being leached most readily from the tree's nutrient cycle.
The fact that adding these nutrients does help trees in the short run demonstrates that soils are being depleted. But treating symptoms and not causes is always a desperation measure. It could even make things worse in some way we don't yet understand. Because of the numbers of sick trees and the speed of the decline, at best it's a band-aid solution for a few commercial sites.
To apply this to all the forests of eastern Canada, it just isn't practical. And really, emission control is the only answer.
Fast action on pollution could still save our trees and water. But they aren't the only reasons we have to worry about what we've done to the air.
In the 60s and the 70s, we were preoccupied with the concern and the measurement of acidification of surface waters, which was quite controversial at the time, just as controversial as anything we see now. But we've now shown that that, in fact, was happening. In the 80s, we're now very preoccupied with the concern for forests. it's also controversial. You wonder if, in fact, in the 90s, we won't become more concerned with the effects on human health. We live in the same environment that the fish and the trees live in.
We know that the industrial wastes we put in the air are poisonous in high concentrations. What we don't know is what smaller cumulative amounts are doing to us year after year. The alarm has already been sounded. The American Lung Association is demanding immediate pollution controls because of their evidence of reduced lung capacity and increased incidence of disease. The Harvard Health Effects Institute estimates that 90,000 Americans die every year from breathing the sulfates that are in acid rain. Researchers are also investigating links between air pollution and diseases like Alzheimer's and breast and bowel cancer.
The highest levels of sulfate are being seen where the sources are. So that means that in the Midwest, in Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, the sulfates are the worst, and the health effects there should be the most severe. But the message has not been brought home to the people in that part of the country that they are the victims of their own pollution. They are thinking that they would be cleaning up only to save trees and lakes somewhere else. But they would really be cleaning up to save their own lives and to protect their children. And that message has to be brought home.
We're all part of the natural world, so its decline quickly begins to affect us. Far from the pollution sources, people are feeling the poisonous effects of long-range air pollution. Millions of people in the East are losing the beauty around their homes, the private yards and greenery that are a symbol of North American prosperity. They're losing their property, their productive land. The land is losing wildlife habitat, shade, and moisture. You can still go out to lakes and streams, but you can't assume there'll be fish or ducks or other kinds of wildlife there. Every year, $5 billion worth of agricultural crops are destroyed by ozone and other forms of air pollution in the US alone. And we all know that acids and other corrosives in the air are destroying our buildings, our houses, eating steel and glass. A cleanup of air pollution in the US would only cost about $20 to $30 per person per year. Yet in some Midwestern cities, people are already paying $70 a year just to keep up with air pollution damage to their buildings. Our most treasured North American landmarks are crumbling. We're losing our art, our history, our parents' gravestones. Dick Ayers of the Washington-based National Clean Air Coalition.
People who talk about the economic cost of pollution control tend to forget the economic cost of pollution. And over again, studies indicate that the cost of the pollution itself is far above the cost of cleaning it up. For example, the American Lung Association recently suggested that simply the costs of hospitalization and lost time at work caused by pollution could be as high as $40 billion a year in the United States. That would dwarf the cost of controlling acid rain.
Colin Isaacs of Canada's Pollution Probe.
If we don't give priority to cleanup of the environment, then the economic pressures will become huge because the economy requires a clean environment for its sustenance. If the environment is destroyed, the economy will come tumbling down as well. And I think it's incredibly important to get that message across to the economic planners, that planning an economy without planning an environment is economic suicide.
In fact, the cost of cleaning the environment is not as staggering as industry makes it out to be. One of many examples is the Inco nickel smelter in Sudbury, Ontario. The worst single polluter in the hemisphere, by the mid-1960s, it had destroyed every tree and lake within a 30-kilometer radius. To every request for a cleanup, the company pleaded impossible expense and threatened closure. But by 1980, the Ontario government finally succeeded in forcing a meaningful agreement. Now, Inco has reduced emissions by 2/3, with a total reduction of 90% coming by 1994. and business is booming. The smelter is reaping its highest profits in decades. This kind of story can now be repeated with any industry. What's required is hard legislation, enforcement, and advanced planning to cushion jobs and expenses for old or sensitive industries. Inco's reduction is part of Canada's nationwide program to reduce its sulfur dioxide emissions by 50% by 1994, and to control nitrous oxides as well. They hope to get the U.S. to do the same. Tom McMillan, Canada's Environment Minister.
Canada, like the United States and other countries, has neglected acid rain pollution. We don't come to the table with any sense of superiority. We procrastinated, we belabored the science, we ignored the obvious until we could no longer ignore the need to act, so we acted. Having acted, we think we now have the moral authority to say to our American neighbors, look, half the acid rain that wreaks havoc in Canada comes from the United States. So even if we did everything we could to control acid rain from within our own sources, we would at best be dealing with half the problem.
The U.S. government has shown it can respond very quickly to a pollution threat, depending on which way the wind is blowing. Just 2 years ago, Mexico opened a new copper smelter at Nacozari near the Arizona border. At its peak, it would dump 500,000 tons of sulfur dioxide a year on everything downwind, including asthmatics living in the American desert for their health. In 1987, Nacozari got pollution controls through a treaty that reduces pollution crossing the U.S.-Mexican border. In 10 years of increasingly fevered negotiations about the same thing, transboundary pollution, Canada has got exactly nothing. And large parts of the U.S. have got nothing. No bill to protect the clarity of air in New England. Nothing to protect Midwesterners breathing sulfur hazes stronger than Nacozari's.
Stop acid rain!
Dozens of control bills have been presented in Washington in only 8 years, and public frustration is mounting. Why isn't there a law?
What's between us and acid rain control is the special interests of a few very large economic entities, utilities, coal companies primarily. They have fought a very powerful campaign working through the President of the United States and through certain members of Congress to hold off the public will. And there really is no other way to characterize this than simply a case of special interests sabotaging the public will.
Our governments have lagged on this issue. Meanwhile, the environment continues to deteriorate in both the U.S. and Canada.
Cleanup of environmental problems is a very high priority for the Canadian public. Yet if you look at federal government spending, you see money going on everything but dealing with the serious problems we've got today. We're not getting the research done, we're not getting the cleanup programs in place, we're falling way behind many other countries in the way we address the destruction of the environment.
Three of our most frightening pollution problems, acid rain, ozone depletion, and the greenhouse effect, have the same cause, using the air as a garbage dump. The collapse of these northeastern forests is a warning of what is in store for all of us if we don't overcome our greed and apathy.
We cannot afford to destroy the natural systems on which the human population depends. If we kill the fish and the lakes and the forests, we're not far behind. We've got to understand that this is part of a continuum. We've got to learn to live in balance, in harmony with the environment. We can't continue to destroy it and expect it to support us. Our technology is not going to support us if the Earth collapses, if the Earth systems, the natural systems, collapse. so we can't continue to poison the earth. It's that simple.
This magnificent tree is 150 years old. It's a giant of the forest, and its shape is almost perfect. But if you really look at it, you'll see that it's starting to die too. I think this is really terrible, because our whole forest is dying in Quebec. If this goes on, what will be left for our children? It breaks my heart to see things like this.